Maria Santos had always been smaller than her peers. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing barely 110 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a soldier preparing for one of the most dangerous military operations in recent history. The other recruits at the training facility would often exchange glances when she walked by, their expressions mixing doubt with barely concealed amusement. The whispers started during her first week at the Advanced Combat Training Center in Colorado. While other soldiers struggled with the heavy equipment, Maria seemed to disappear under the weight of her full combat gear. Her rifle, a standard-issue weapon that most soldiers handled with ease, appeared almost comically large in her small hands. The drill instructors noticed too, though they kept their observations to themselves, watching carefully as this unlikely candidate pushed through each grueling exercise. During morning runs, Maria would fall behind the pack, her shorter legs, working twice as hard to keep up with the longer strides of her male counterparts. In the mess hall, conversations would quiet when she approached, not out of respect, but because nobody quite knew what to make of her presence in this elite program. She was an anomaly in a world built for people twice her size. The doubts weren't entirely unfounded. Military combat roles had traditionally been dominated by larger, stronger individuals who could carry heavy equipment across long distances while maintaining fighting effectiveness. Maria's physical appearance suggested she might struggle with these demands. Her arms looked thin compared to the muscular builds of seasoned veterans, and her quiet demeanor contrasted sharply with the aggressive confidence typically expected from combat soldiers. But Maria had something that couldn't be measured by physical appearance alone. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she had learned early that survival often depended more on intelligence and determination than pure strength. Her father, a former Marine who had served in Vietnam, had taught her that the most dangerous enemy was often the one you underestimated. He had shared stories of small-statured soldiers who had accomplished extraordinary things through careful planning and unwavering resolve. The training program was designed to push every candidate to their absolute limits. Each day brought new challenges that seemed specifically crafted to expose weaknesses. During weapons training, while others focused on rapid firing and impressive displays of firepower, Maria spent extra hours studying ballistics, wind patterns, and precision shooting techniques. She understood that accuracy would matter more than speed if she ever found herself in a real combat situation. Her approach to strategy sessions was equally methodical. While other candidates dominated discussions with bold tactical suggestions, Maria listened carefully, analyzing every scenario from multiple angles. She would often wait until others had finished speaking before offering her input, and her suggestions were typically quieter but more thoroughly considered. The instructors began to notice that her ideas, while less flashy than others, were often the most practical and effective. The physical challenges remained her greatest obstacle. During obstacle courses, she would struggle with walls that others could easily climb over, forcing her to find alternative routes that required more time but demonstrated creative problem-solving. Carrying exercises were particularly difficult, as her smaller frame meant she had to work harder to transport the same equipment load as larger soldiers. Yet she never complained or requested modifications to the standard requirements. What began to set Maria apart was her absolute refusal to give up. When other candidates would rest during breaks, she would continue practicing with her rifle, working on her stance and breathing techniques. She studied combat manuals late into the night, memorizing tactics and strategies that might compensate for her physical limitations. Her determination was quiet but unmistakable, and it began to earn grudging respect from some of her fellow trainees. The first real test came during a simulated combat exercise that required teams to navigate through a mock urban environment while under simulated enemy fire. Maria was assigned to a squad with 4 other soldiers, all of whom were significantly larger and more experienced. The exercise was designed to last 6 hours and would test everything they had learned about combat tactics, teamwork, and decision-making under pressure. From the beginning, it was clear that Maria's teammates expected her to be a liability. They assigned her to rear positions and gave her support roles that would keep her away from the most intense action. Their strategy was to protect their weakest link while the stronger members handled the primary objectives. It was a reasonable, approach based on conventional military thinking, but it underestimated what Maria was truly capable of accomplishing. As the exercise progressed, the simulated enemy forces began to outmaneuver Maria's team. Their initial tactical advantage was being eroded by superior positioning and coordinated attacks from the opposing force. The larger soldiers who had taken the lead were finding themselves pinned down by accurate simulated fire, unable to advance toward their objectives. The exercise was becoming a stalemate that would likely result in failure for their entire squad. Maria had been observing the situation carefully, noting patterns in the enemy's movements, and identifying weaknesses in their defensive positions. She realized that her smaller size, which had been viewed as a disadvantage, might actually allow her to move through areas where larger soldiers couldn't go. There were narrow passages and concealed routes that could provide access to strategic positions, but they would require someone willing to take significant risks. When she suggested her plan to the team leader, his initial reaction was dismissive. The idea of sending their smallest team member on what amounted to a solo infiltration mission seemed like a recipe for disaster. But as their situation became increasingly desperate, and with time running out on the exercise, he reluctantly agreed to let her attempt her approach. The decision would prove to be more significant than anyone could have anticipated, setting the stage for events that would challenge every assumption about combat effectiveness and military capability. The narrow drainage tunnel was barely wide enough for Maria's small frame, and she moved through it with calculated precision. Above her, she could hear the muffled sounds of simulated gunfire as her teammates maintained their positions, essentially serving as a distraction while she attempted her solo infiltration. The tunnel was dark, cramped, and filled with obstacles that would have been impossible for larger soldiers to navigate effectively. Maria, S unconventional approach paid off when she emerged behind enemy lines completely undetected by the opposing force. Using her knowledge of urban warfare tactics, she was able to disable several key defensive positions and create openings that allowed her team to advance and ultimately win the exercise. The victory was decisive and unexpected, transforming what had seemed like certain failure into a comprehensive tactical success. The aftermath of the exercise marked a turning point in how others perceived Maria's capabilities. The drill instructors were impressed not just by her successful execution of a difficult mission, but by her ability to think creatively under pressure and identify solutions that others had missed. Her teammates, who had initially viewed her as a potential liability, began to recognize that her different perspective and unique physical attributes could actually be valuable assets in certain situations. Word of Maria's performance began to spread throughout the training facility. Other instructors started paying closer attention to her progress, and some began to reconsider their assumptions about physical requirements for combat effectiveness. Her precision with weapons was becoming legendary among the trainees, and her tactical intelligence was gaining recognition from military strategists who had initially dismissed her potential. The success in the exercise led to Maria being selected for increasingly challenging assignments. She was placed in leadership roles during subsequent training missions, where her ability to analyze complex situations and develop innovative solutions continued to impress observers. Her quiet confidence was beginning to influence other soldiers, who started to adopt some of her methodical approaches to problem-solving and tactical planning. However, not everyone was convinced that Maria belonged in combat roles. Some senior officers remained skeptical about the wisdom of deploying smaller soldiers in active combat situations, regardless of their training performance. They argued that real combat was unpredictable and brutal, and that physical strength and endurance would ultimately matter more than tactical intelligence. These debates reflected broader discussions within military leadership about evolving definitions of combat effectiveness. Maria was aware of the ongoing skepticism, but she remained focused on continuous improvement. She intensified her training regimen, spending additional hours on marksmanship practice and studying advanced tactical manuals. She also began working with military psychologists to develop mental preparation techniques that would help her maintain focus and decision-making ability under extreme stress. Her dedication was absolute, driven by a determination to prove that effectiveness in combat could take many different forms. The opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in a real-world situation came sooner than anyone expected. Intelligence reports indicated that a terrorist cell was operating in a remote mountain region, using their knowledge of local terrain to evade conventional military operations. The terrain was particularly challenging, with narrow passes and concealed positions that favored defenders over attacking forces. Previous attempts to locate and neutralize the threat had been unsuccessful, resulting in casualties and strategic setbacks. Military planners recognized that this situation required a different approach. Traditional large-scale operations had proven ineffective in this environment, and there was growing interest in deploying smaller, more specialized units that could operate with greater stealth and flexibility. Maria's recent training performance and unique skill set made her an unexpected but logical candidate for this type of mission. The briefing for the operation was conducted in a secure facility, with only essential personnel present. Intelligence. Officers presented detailed maps of the target area, highlighting known enemy positions and potential routes of approach. The terrorist cell was estimated to consist of approximately 30 individuals, all experienced fighters familiar with the local terrain and equipped with modern weapons and communication equipment. Maria studied the briefing materials carefully, noting that the enemy had chosen their location strategically. The mountain terrain provided natural defensive advantages, with limited approaches that could be easily monitored and defended. Previous military operations had been detected early, allowing the terrorists to either escape or prepare ambush, positions that resulted in significant casualties for attacking forces. What struck Maria most about the intelligence reports was that the enemy's defensive strategy relied heavily on their ability to spot approaching threats from a distance. The open terrain around their position provided excellent visibility for defenders, but made it extremely difficult for attackers to achieve surprise. Any successful operation would need to find ways to overcome this fundamental tactical disadvantage. The mission briefing revealed that Maria would not be operating alone. She was assigned to a specialized unit consisting of 12 soldiers, all chosen for their specific skills and experience in unconventional warfare. The team included explosives experts, communications specialists, and snipers, each bringing capabilities that would be essential for the mission's success. Maria was designated as the primary reconnaissance specialist, responsible for gathering intelligence and identifying weaknesses in enemy defenses. The team leader was Captain Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who had initially been skeptical about including Maria in the unit. His concerns were based on practical considerations rather than prejudice. He genuinely worried that her physical limitations might compromise the mission or put other team members at risk. However, her training performance and the specific requirements of this operation had convinced his superiors that her unique skills were necessary. During pre-mission planning sessions, Maria's input proved invaluable. Her detailed analysis of the terrain and enemy positions revealed potential approaches that had been overlooked by previous planners. She identified several concealed routes that could allow small teams to get much closer to the target area without being detected. Her suggestions formed the foundation of the tactical plan that would guide their operation. The night before deployment, Maria spent time mentally preparing for what she knew would be the ultimate test of everything she had learned. She reviewed every detail of the mission plan, visualizing different scenarios and potential complications. She cleaned and checked her rifle repeatedly, ensuring that every component was functioning perfectly. This weapon had become an extension of herself during training, and she knew that her life and the lives of her teammates might depend on her ability to use it effectively. Combat Story. Part 3. The helicopter dropped Maria's team at a landing zone 15 miles from the target location, under cover of darkness and complete radio silence. The mountain air was thin and cold, and the terrain was even more challenging than the briefing materials had suggested. Rocky outcroppings and steep inclines made movement difficult, while loose stones threatened to create noise that could compromise their approach. The team moved in single file, with Maria positioned second in line to take advantage of her superior knowledge of the planned route. Their progress was slow and methodical, with frequent stops to check navigation and assess potential threats. Maria's smaller size proved advantageous almost immediately, as she was able to navigate through narrow passages and over difficult terrain with less effort than her larger teammates. She also demonstrated an instinctive understanding of camouflage and concealment, seeming to disappear into the landscape, even when other soldiers remained partially visible. After 6 hours of careful movement, the team reached their first observation point, a rocky ledge that provided a clear view of the terrorist camp below. Through high-powered optics, they could see that the intelligence reports had been accurate regarding the enemy's numbers and defensive preparations. The camp was well organized and heavily fortified, with multiple layers of security and clear fields of fire covering all obvious approaches. Maria spent considerable time studying the enemy positions through her rifle scope, noting details that would be crucial for the mission's success. She identified patrol patterns, communication procedures, and weapons placements with the precision of someone who understood that small observations could mean the difference between life and death. Her teammates were impressed by her attention to detail and her ability to remain completely still for extended periods while gathering intelligence. The original mission plan called for the team to establish a forward observation post and wait for additional forces to arrive before launching the main assault. However, as they monitored enemy communications, it became clear that the terrorists were planning to relocate within the next 48 hours. If they moved to a new location, months of intelligence gathering would be wasted, and the opportunity to neutralize this threat might be lost permanently. Captain Rodriguez faced an impossible decision. His team was outnumbered more than 2-1, operating in terrain that favored the defenders, and without the backup support that had been planned for the operation. Attempting an assault under these conditions violated basic military doctrine and could result in catastrophic casualties. But allowing the enemy to escape would mean that all previous sacrifices had been meaningless, and the terrorist threat would continue indefinitely. During the planning discussion, Maria presented an alternative approach that initially seemed impossibly risky. She had identified a route that would allow her to get within effective rifle range of the enemy camp without being detected. From that position, she could potentially eliminate key targets and create enough confusion to allow the rest of the team to advance. The plan required her to operate alone, deep in enemy territory, with no backup support if things went wrong. The other team members were initially opposed to Maria's suggestion. The idea of sending their smallest team member on what amounted to a suicide mission seemed tactically unsound and morally questionable. They argued that even if she managed to reach the proposed position, she would be facing overwhelming odds with no realistic chance of survival. The plan seemed to sacrifice their most vulnerable member in a desperate attempt to salvage an already compromised mission. But Maria's analysis of the situation was compelling. She pointed out that conventional assault tactics had failed repeatedly in this terrain, and that their current position was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy patrols expanded their search patterns. Her proposed approach offered the only realistic chance of achieving mission objectives while minimizing casualties for the team as a whole. She also emphasized that her size and training made her uniquely qualified for this type of infiltration mission. After extensive debate, Captain Rodriguez reluctantly approved Maria's plan, with significant modifications designed to improve her chances of survival and provide extraction options if the situation became untenable. The team would provide overwatch and covering fire from multiple positions, and detailed contingency plans were developed for various scenarios. Maria would carry additional ammunition and emergency medical supplies, and communication protocols were established to coordinate her actions with team movements. The infiltration began at dawn, with Maria moving alone toward the enemy position while her teammates took up overwatch positions on surrounding ridges. Her movement was incredibly slow and careful, taking advantage of every piece of natural cover and concealment. She moved like someone who understood that a single careless moment could not only cost her life but also compromise the entire mission and endanger her teammates. The route Maria had chosen took her through a series of ravines and rock formations that provided concealment, but also created natural choke points where discovery would be almost certain death. She had studied topographical maps extensively and identified specific waypoints where she could rest and assess the situation before continuing. Each segment of the journey required different tactics and presented unique challenges that tested every aspect of her training. As she approached the final position, Maria could hear conversations from the enemy camp and smell smoke from their cooking fires. She was now close enough that any mistake would be immediately detected, and her escape routes were becoming increasingly limited. The weight of the mission and the trust her teammates had placed in her created enormous psychological pressure, but her training and preparation had taught her to channel that stress into heightened focus and awareness. The position she had identified during reconnaissance proved to be even better than expected. A natural depression in the rocks provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform, while offering clear lines of sight to multiple key targets. Maria carefully arranged her equipment and checked her rifle one final time, knowing that her next actions would determine not only her own survival, but also the success of a mission that had consumed months of planning and preparation. From her concealed position, Maria could see approximately 40 enemy fighters, significantly more than intelligence estimates had suggested. They were well armed and appeared to be preparing for movement, confirming the intercepted communications about their planned relocation. Many were carrying heavy equipment and weapons, suggesting that they represented a serious long-term threat that needed to be neutralized. The stakes of the mission had suddenly become much higher than anyone had anticipated. Combat Story Part 4. Maria's heart rate remained steady as she surveyed the enemy camp through her rifle scope, despite the overwhelming odds she faced. The months of intensive training had prepared her for exactly this moment, and she found herself entering a state of focused calm that allowed her to process information and make decisions with crystal clarity. Every detail of the scene below registered in her mind as she began to identify priority targets and plan her sequence of actions. The terrorist fighters were moving with purpose and organization, clearly following a predetermined schedule for their relocation. Several individuals appeared to be leaders, directing the activities of others and coordinating the movement of equipment and supplies. Maria recognized that eliminating these key figures would create the maximum disruption and confusion, potentially causing the entire operation to collapse into chaos that her teammates could exploit. Her first target was obvious, a tall man in military fatigues who was clearly directing the packing and preparation activities. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, and other fighters consistently deferred to his instructions. Through her scope, Maria could see that he was armed with a modern assault rifle and wore body armor that suggested military training and experience. Taking him down would require precise shot placement to ensure immediate incapacitation. The distance to her target was approximately 400 meters, well within her effective range but requiring careful calculation of wind conditions and bullet trajectory. Maria had practiced similar shots countless times during training, but she understood that real combat introduced variables that no training exercise could fully replicate. The psychological pressure of knowing that missing might doom her teammates created additional challenges that required extraordinary mental discipline to overcome. Maria controlled her breathing and began the careful process of aligning her shot. The wind was light but variable, requiring her to time her shot for a moment when conditions were optimal. She also had to account for the target's movement patterns, waiting for him to pause in a position that would allow for the most effective shot placement. The entire process required patience and precision that went far beyond simple marksmanship skills. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the shot was perfect. Her target dropped immediately, creating instant confusion among the other fighters who scrambled for cover while trying to determine the source of the attack. The sound of the rifle shot echoed through the mountains, making it difficult for the enemy to pinpoint her exact location. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they organized an effective response, and she intended to make the most of that opportunity. Her second shot eliminated another apparent leader who was attempting to organize a defensive response. The man had been shouting orders and pointing toward higher ground when Maria's bullet found its mark, dropping him and further increasing the chaos in the camp. The remaining fighters were now completely confused, unsure of how many attackers they faced or where the next shot might come from. Their training and discipline were beginning to break down under the psychological pressure of an unseen enemy. Maria continued firing with methodical precision, each shot carefully aimed and timed to maximize its impact. Her targets were chosen, not just for their immediate threat level, but for their importance to the enemy's command structure and ability to mount an organized response. She was essentially conducting a one-person psychological warfare campaign, using precision shooting to create the illusion of a much larger attacking force. The enemy fighters eventually began to return fire, but their shots were wild and unfocused. Without a clear target to shoot at, they were essentially firing at shadows while exposing themselves to Maria's accurate shooting. She had positioned herself so well that their muzzle flashes revealed their locations, while her position remained concealed by natural terrain features and careful use of camouflage techniques. As the engagement continued, Maria's teammates began their coordinated assault from multiple directions. The confusion and casualties she had created among the enemy fighters made it impossible for them to establish effective defensive positions or coordinate their response to the new threats. What had initially appeared to be an impossible tactical situation was rapidly turning into a complete collapse of enemy resistance. The psychological impact of Maria's shooting was even more significant than the physical casualties she was inflicting. The enemy fighters had no idea how many shooters they faced or where the next attack might come from. The precision and consistency of her shooting suggested the presence of highly trained military snipers, leading them to overestimate the size and capabilities of the attacking force. This fear multiplied the effectiveness of every shot and contributed to the breakdown of their defensive efforts. During a brief lull in the fighting, Maria could hear enemy fighters shouting to each other in increasingly panicked voices. Some were calling for retreat, while others demanded to know how many attackers they faced. The confusion in their voices confirmed that her psychological warfare tactics were working exactly as planned, creating doubt and fear that was more effective than any conventional assault could have been. The engagement had now lasted nearly 20 minutes, far longer than Maria had expected to survive in such an exposed position. Her ammunition supply was running low, and she knew that her luck couldn't hold indefinitely. Enemy fighters were beginning to work their way closer to her position, using fire and movement techniques that suggested at least some of them had military training. She needed to consider extraction options while she still had the mobility and ammunition to fight her way out. However, as she assessed her tactical situation, Maria realized that her teammates were making significant progress in their assault. The confusion she had created was allowing them to advance much more rapidly than anticipated, and they were now in positions to provide covering fire if she needed to relocate. The mission that had seemed impossible just hours earlier was beginning to look like it might actually succeed. The sound of explosions from multiple directions indicated that her teammates were now engaging with grenades and other heavy weapons. The coordinated nature of these attacks confirmed that they had successfully used the chaos she created to establish advantageous positions throughout the enemy camp. What had begun as a desperate solo mission was evolving into a well-executed team assault that was systematically dismantling enemy resistance. Maria continued to provide precision fire support, but her role was gradually shifting from primary attacker to overwatch sniper. Her teammates were now carrying the main burden of the assault, while she used her elevated position and superior optics to identify threats and provide accurate covering fire. This evolution in tactics demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability that had made her such an effective soldier, despite her unconventional physical characteristics. The realization that they were actually winning this engagement brought new challenges and responsibilities. Success was no longer a distant hope, but an achievable objective that required careful management to ensure that it didn't slip away through overconfidence or tactical mistakes. Maria had to balance aggressive support for her teammates with careful conservation of ammunition and maintenance of her own defensive position. Combat Story, Part 5. The intensity of the battle reached its peak as enemy fighters began to realize the full scope of their tactical disadvantage. Desperation drove them to increasingly risky maneuvers, with small groups attempting to flank Maria's position while others tried to establish defensive positions that could provide covering fire. Their movements were becoming more coordinated as surviving leaders reasserted control. but the damage to their command structure and morale had already been too severe to overcome. Maria found herself engaged in the most challenging shooting of her career, as targets appeared and disappeared rapidly among the rocky terrain. Her training in rapid target acquisition and engagement became crucial as she shifted between multiple threats, sometimes taking shots at enemies who were visible for only seconds before disappearing behind cover. The precision required for these shots exceeded anything she had experienced during training, demanding split-second decisions that combined technical skill with tactical awareness. The enemy fighters who were attempting to reach her position demonstrated considerable courage and determination. They moved using professional tactics, coordinating their advances with covering fire and attempting to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria realized that some of these individuals had military training that rivaled her own, making them extremely dangerous opponents who couldn't be underestimated or dismissed as simple criminals or fanatics. Her ammunition situation was becoming critical, with only 2 full magazines remaining. Each shot now carried additional weight, as she needed to balance immediate tactical requirements with the possibility that the engagement might continue for an extended period. She began to prioritize targets more carefully, focusing on enemies who posed the most immediate threat to her teammates while avoiding shots that were unlikely to achieve decisive results. The sound of approaching helicopters provided the first indication that reinforcements might be arriving, though it was initially unclear whether these aircraft carried friendly forces or additional enemy fighters. The timing seemed too coincidental to be a rescue mission, suggesting that the enemy might have called for support when the battle began. Maria prepared for the possibility that she might soon be facing an even more challenging tactical situation. Her teammates' voices on the radio confirmed that they were also aware of the approaching aircraft, and their tone suggested concern rather than relief. The mission had been planned as a covert operation with minimal outside support, meaning that any helicopters in the area were likely hostile. This development threatened to transform a successful assault into a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. The first helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, and Maria immediately recognized it as a military transport aircraft, rather than an attack helicopter. This observation suggested that it was carrying additional fighters rather than providing direct fire support, which would give her team a brief opportunity to prepare defensive positions before facing reinforced enemy forces. She quickly communicated this assessment to her teammates, while adjusting her position to provide covering fire for their movements. The helicopter began its approach to a landing zone near the enemy camp, but its flight path brought it directly into Maria's field of fire. She realized that this presented an unexpected opportunity to significantly impact the tactical situation by preventing the aircraft from landing reinforcements. The shot would be extremely challenging, requiring her to hit a moving target at maximum range, but success could prevent the battle from becoming completely unwinnable. Maria calculated the helicopter's speed and trajectory, leading her target by what she estimated would account for bullet travel time and aircraft movement. The shot required her to account for multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining perfect stability, despite the stress and fatigue of extended combat. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger at the precise moment when all factors aligned optimally. The bullet struck the helicopter's tail rotor, causing immediate loss of control that sent the aircraft spinning toward the ground. The pilot managed to auto-rotate sufficiently to prevent total destruction, but the hard landing left the aircraft disabled and scattered the reinforcement troops across difficult terrain. This single shot had effectively neutralized what could have been a decisive advantage for the enemy forces. The crash of the helicopter marked a turning point in the battle, as remaining enemy fighters realized that their situation was becoming hopeless. Some began attempting to escape individually, abandoning their equipment and positions in favor of survival. Others maintained defensive positions but seemed to be fighting more to cover the escape of their comrades than to achieve victory. The cohesive resistance that had initially challenged Maria's team was dissolving into desperate individual survival efforts. Captain Rodriguez's voice on the radio indicated that her teammates were now in control of most of the enemy camp and were beginning the process of securing prisoners and gathering intelligence materials. The mission objectives were being achieved, but the process of consolidating their gains would require continued vigilance and careful management of the remaining threats. Maria maintained her overwatch position while her teammates conducted detailed searches of the camp. The intelligence materials recovered from the camp exceeded all expectations, providing detailed information about terrorist networks and planned operations throughout the region. Documents and electronic devices contained evidence of connections to international terrorist organizations and revealed plans for attacks that could have resulted in massive civilian casualties. The success of this mission would have implications far beyond the immediate tactical situation. As the immediate combat threat diminished, Maria began to feel the physical and emotional impact of what she had just accomplished. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the battle was beginning to fade, replaced by a profound exhaustion that made even simple movements require conscious effort. She had fired nearly 60 rounds during the engagement, achieving a level of accuracy and effectiveness that would have seemed impossible under such challenging conditions. The realization that she had essentially single-handedly neutralized a force of more than 40 enemy fighters began to sink in as she maintained her overwatch position. The tactical situation that had seemed hopeless just hours earlier had been transformed through her actions into a decisive victory that would save countless innocent lives. The doubts and skepticism she had faced throughout her training seemed insignificant compared to the concrete results she had achieved. Her teammates began the process of calling for extraction helicopters and medical support, while also establishing defensive positions to protect against any remaining threats in the area. The enemy fighters who had attempted to escape would likely regroup and potentially attempt counterattacks, requiring continued vigilance until friendly reinforcements arrived. Maria remained at her position, providing overwatch while her teammates secured the immediate area. The success of the mission represented vindication not just for Maria personally, but for evolving concepts of military effectiveness that valued skills and intelligence over traditional physical attributes. Her performance demonstrated that combat effectiveness could take many forms, and that assumptions about physical requirements for military roles needed to be re-evaluated based on actual performance rather than conventional expectations. As she waited for extraction, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The skepticism and doubt she had encountered during training had been transformed into respect and admiration through her actions under the ultimate test of combat. She had proven that determination, skill, and intelligence could overcome seemingly impossible odds when applied with precision and courage. Combat Story, Part 6. The extraction helicopters arrived 3 hours after the engagement ended, bringing medical personnel and intelligence specialists who would process the materials recovered from the enemy camp. As Maria finally left her overwatch position and rejoined her teammates, she could see the profound respect in their eyes. The soldier they had initially viewed as a potential liability had become the hero of one of the most successful counter-terrorism operations in recent military history. The debriefing sessions that followed were extensive and detailed. As military analysts sought to understand exactly how such a small force had achieved such decisive results against overwhelming odds, Maria's tactical decisions and shooting performance became the subject of detailed analysis, with experts trying to identify lessons that could be applied to future operations. Her approach to psychological warfare and precision shooting was recognized as innovative and potentially revolutionary for small unit tactics. The intelligence recovered from the camp led to the disruption of multiple terrorist cells across several countries, preventing attacks that could have killed hundreds of innocent civilians. The documents and electronic devices provided crucial information about funding sources, communication networks, and operational plans that intelligence agencies had been trying to uncover for years. The success of Maria's mission had implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Within days of returning to base, Maria found herself at the center of intense media attention and military recognition. The story of the small soldier who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious captured public imagination and challenged traditional assumptions about military capability and effectiveness. Her achievement became a symbol of how individual determination and skill could overcome systemic barriers and conventional limitations. The skeptics who had questioned her suitability for combat roles were forced to reconsider their positions in light of her extraordinary performance. Military leadership began reviewing recruitment and training policies, recognizing that physical attributes alone were inadequate measures of combat potential. Maria's success demonstrated that effective soldiers could come in many different forms, and that diversity of capabilities could enhance rather than compromise military effectiveness. Captain Rodriguez, who had initially harbored doubts about including Maria in his unit, became one of her strongest advocates. He testified before military review boards about her exceptional performance and recommended that similar soldiers be actively recruited and trained for specialized operations. His conversion from skeptic to advocate became a powerful example of how actual performance could overcome preconceived notions and institutional bias. The training facility, where Maria had initially faced doubt and mockery, became a center for developing new approaches to combat training that emphasized tactical intelligence and precision skills alongside traditional physical conditioning. Her methods and techniques were studied and incorporated into training programs, ensuring that future soldiers would benefit from the innovations she had developed through necessity and determination. Maria herself remained remarkably humble about her achievements, consistently emphasizing the teamwork and support that had made her success possible. She deflected personal praise while advocating for changes in military culture that would create opportunities for other unconventional soldiers to prove their worth. Her focus remained on improving military effectiveness rather than personal recognition or career advancement. The psychological impact of her achievement extended beyond military circles, inspiring individuals who had faced similar doubts about their capabilities in various fields. Her story became a powerful example of how perceived weaknesses could be transformed into unique strengths when approached with creativity and determination. Schools and organizations began using her example to encourage students and employees to challenge conventional limitations and pursue their goals despite skepticism from others. Military psychologists studied Maria's mental preparation techniques and stress management strategies, finding applications that could benefit soldiers in various specialties. Her approach to maintaining focus and decision-making ability under extreme pressure became part of standard military training curricula. The methods she had developed to overcome physical limitations were adapted for use by soldiers recovering from injuries or dealing with other challenges. The tactical innovations Maria had employed during the engagement became subjects of detailed study at military academies and strategic planning centers. Her use of psychological warfare techniques and precision shooting to create the impression of a larger force was recognized as a significant development in small unit tactics. Military strategists began developing new operational concepts based on her approach to asymmetric warfare. Years later, Maria continued to serve in specialized military roles, leading training programs and participating in operations that required her unique combination of skills and experience. She developed advanced courses in precision shooting and tactical intelligence that became mandatory training for special operations units worldwide. Her teaching methods emphasized adaptability and creative problem-solving, encouraging students to find their own strengths rather than trying to fit predetermined molds. The documentary films and books about her mission became educational tools used in military academies around the world. Her story was studied not just as an example of individual heroism, but as a case study in how military organizations could better identify and utilize diverse talents. The battle where she faced 200 enemies with only one rifle became legendary. But Maria always insisted that the real lesson was about the power of preparation, determination, and refusing to accept limitations imposed by others. Her influence extended to military recruitment policies, which were revised to focus more on aptitude and potential rather than traditional physical criteria. Testing procedures were developed to identify candidates with her type of tactical intelligence and precision skills, ensuring that future unconventional soldiers would have opportunities to prove their worth. The military became more diverse and effective as a result of these changes. Maria, S legacy was ultimately measured not just by her own achievements, but by the opportunities she created for others who might have been overlooked under previous systems. The soldiers she trained went on to successful careers in various military specialties, carrying forward her philosophy that effectiveness comes in many forms. Her impact on military culture and tactical doctrine continued to influence operations and training long after her own active service concluded. The doubters who had once mocked her potential for success became testimonies to the danger of underestimating individuals based on superficial characteristics. Military leaders learned to look beyond obvious traits and to value the unique contributions that every soldier could make when properly trained and deployed. Maria's story became a permanent reminder that the most dangerous enemies are often those who are underestimated, and that the same principle applies to allies and teammates. Her rifle, the weapon that had been almost comically oversized in her hands during early training, was eventually retired to a place of honor in the military museum. The display included detailed accounts of the engagement where she had used it so effectively, serving as an inspiration to visitors and a reminder that heroism comes in many forms. The weapon that had once seemed too large for her had become an extension of her will and determination, proving that skill and courage could overcome any physical limitations. The mountain where Maria had made her legendary stand was later designated as a training site for special operations units. The terrain that had once seemed impossible to navigate became a classroom where new generations of soldiers learned about tactical innovation and the power of individual determination. The location served as a living monument to the idea that no odds are truly insurmountable when faced with proper preparation and unwavering resolve. Maria S. story continued to inspire military personnel and civilians alike, demonstrating that extraordinary achievements are possible when individuals refuse to accept the limitations that others try to impose on them. Her legacy lived on through the soldiers she trained, the policies she influenced, and the countless individuals who found courage in her example to pursue their own seemingly impossible goals. The small woman who had once been mocked for her size had become a giant in military history, proving that true strength comes from within.